Okay. Okay, Dwight Lilly here. Boy, the coronavirus, it's lucky it didn't grab me and pull me under on my way over here. You know, this fear that's going on out here in the world is what's causing 99% of our problems right now. And as a Christian, you should be comforting in the fact that God always has everything under complete control. It's only when man sticks his fingers into it that we get messed up. So we know that this is the end times. Those of us that have paid attention in 2 Timothy chapter 3, dangers of the last time, it says, you should know this, Timothy, that in the last days there will be very difficult times. For people will love only themselves and their money. They will be boastful and proud, scoffing at God, disobedient to their parents, and ungrateful. They will consider nothing sacred. They will be unloving and unforgiving. They will slander others, have no self-control. They will be cruel, hate what is good. They will betray their friends, be reckless, be puffed up with pride, and have pleasure rather than God. They will act religious, but they will reject the power that could make them godly. Stay away from people like that. They are the kind who work their way into people's homes and win the confidence of vulnerable women who are burdened with the guilt of sin and controlled by various desires. Such women are forever following new teachings, but they are never able to understand the truth. These teachers oppose the truth just as James and Jambres opposed Moses. They have depraved minds and a counterfeit faith, but they won't get away with this for long. Someday, everyone will recognize what fools they are, just as with James and Jambres. Now, Timothy, this was a letter from Paul, and it pretty much lays out how people have been behaving in our times right now. People that you know, people that you go to work with, people that you go to school with, those that you have considered friends, the type of character they're displaying. Now, I was talking to the producer here a few minutes ago, and his wife was saying that she was at a Costco store and they nearly had to call the police down there because people were fighting over toilet paper. Now, this is not displaying a people that is confident that God's got their back. You see, this is the way a Christian should be approaching. In fact, all people should be approaching. I shouldn't just put out there Christian, because that's limiting the number of people that I should be addressing. But everybody should have confidence that this virus is not the end of the world. What it does, it portrays these end times, that the end of the world is coming, and you should be prepared. You should seek God, not your government. Only He has the power to help. This virus can be compared, in my opinion, to a nuclear attack after effect. America's hospitals will be overrun with coronavirus in just 8 days. Obama's Medicare boss issues dire warning, as doctors say as many as 500,000 are already infected and 10 million will need care. Okay, we as thinking human beings have to recognize the facts out there, that we have a virus, that it has no cure. There is treatment for it, But we don't have any immunity to this particular virus because it's a brand new virus, and we have to build up our immunity to it. In knowing that, you have to use common sense in your own life. Jesus would practice common sense. You should be practicing common sense. There are only, I'm going to give you some statistics here. There are only 790,000 hospital beds and 100,000 ICU beds total in all the hospitals across the country. There's a guy by the name of Dr. Makery. He warned people not to believe the current figures that there are only 2,200 people who are affected. Now see, this should be common sense. You have to put your brains to power here. We've heard already that there was not adequate testing supplies out there. In fact, of the test kits that the government sent out to the various states, 90% of them were defective. Batteries were not included in them. Some of them had dead batteries in them, lacking in instructions. So we have to accept the fact that, well, as a people, not pointing fingers at anybody else, we were not prepared for these times. And the times are upon us. This doctor went on to say that the true number is likely far more than that. As many as 500,000 people already have it. Okay, this statistic here comes from the fact that since we have no immunity, since we are a people that are, go out into crowds, we go shopping, we go to restaurants, we go to the job, we go to work, and how this virus is passed on to one person to another, that if you have a person that is infected with the virus, they can go between 10 and 14 days, roughly, I guess that's an average, before they start showing signs that they are sick. In 10 to 14 days, that virus is active. It can be passed on from one person to another. So we know this fact, that the virus is being passed on amongst people. John Hopkins University Hospital Medical Center predicts 9.6 million people will need to be hospitalized and 3 million will need intensive care. We know this, and I just told you that there's only a total of basically 890,000 total hospital beds in the country. We know this. There's not going to be another, 2-3 million hospital beds created overnight. So we know what our facilities are going to be. As the people, and we can tell this by what's going on in Italy and Spain right now, as people become ill and come down to the hospital, rapidly the beds are going to fill up. Already there's people in the hospital beds for various reasons. They've had a heart attack, they've been in an accident, they're facing some other debilitating disease, they've had surgery. So most of the hospital beds are already taken up. So in knowing this, as a people, we have to become self-reliant on ourselves, as families, as communities. This is not a time to be fighting over toilet paper in the parking lot of a Costco. This is times where you sit down calmly, you pray to God for help. Intercessory prayers are what's needed right now, that we are praying for each other, for our communities, for our states, for our country, for the world itself, not fighting, but calling on God to give us a helping hand here. We don't know what's going to be the end result of this. We do know that when it rains out, like we've had rain locally the last few days, we know that in 4 months, it's probably going to be 110 degrees when I'm sitting in this studio. 4 months from now on that Saturday, it'll probably be 110 degrees outside. I know this. We should welcome this virus as a source of inspiration and as an educational tool. Yes, why not make lemonade out of lemons? Learn from what we are going through right now. So in the future, because there will be a future, there will be another virus, there will be another virus coming down that will not have immunity to. This is not the first time this has happened. Even in the last 200 and some years our country's been around, there were plagues and viruses back in biblical days that people had to contend with. The important thing, I think, is who do you trust to get us through this? You're not going to be able to trust a future government any more than you can trust the government now, or the people back in those days could trust the government that they were dealing with. It's always eventually ends up in your lap, in your church's lap, in your church community's lap, in your local group of friends that you have, that you come together and help each other get through this. There's going to be people among us out there that are going to be sick. They cannot take care of themselves if they're suffering the way they're going to be suffering. It's up to us as the people to take them in and take care of them. Just as Jesus would do. He would not leave you lying in a gutter on the street. He would pick you up and comfort you and feed you and clothe you and take care of you. That is the way it's supposed to be. That is how we have to react. Not the way that's being reacted to right now. I don't know if we've got the phone number here. If anybody wants to call in here, I thought I had it here. But you want to give the phone number out? Is it?
Sure.
In case somebody wants to call in and put their 2 cents into this.
The phone number at the studio is 775-990-4900. That's 775-990-4900. And I will connect you with your favorite host, Dwight Lilly.
Thank you. See, we work together down here in the studio. I'm being the idiot that doesn't have the phone number written in front of me. But there's an example right there. We got to, in order to you not get the number, I could have just said, well, I don't have a number. Instead, it's a matter of working together. It's a perfect example. Okay, I want to go on here and discuss exactly what I labeled the show, that this is how Christians should be reacting in the event of not only the coronavirus, but any such natural disaster that we might have. Is okay, first I think though, here are some frequently asked questions about coronavirus, because I know that it's been in the newspaper, I know that it's been on the TV or the radio, but some of you listening out here still might not be aware of what we're really talking about in this. And this is an article that I got written a couple days ago. It says, what is coronavirus? It says, since the beginning of this year, we've been reading and hearing about a family of viruses known as coronaviruses. There are 69 species of the virus, 7 of which can affect humans. The rest of the virus species are contracted by animals, mostly pigs, bats, and other small mammals. Its name comes from the fact that on the surface of the virus, there are protrusions that correspond to proteins that the virus uses to adhere to other cells it wants to infect. The medical community has known about these viruses since the 1960s. So this is not a brand new family of viruses out there. It's basically 60 years old. However, it wasn't until 2002 to 2003 when the general population began to become familiar with them due to an outbreak of one of the viruses that occurred in China, eventually called SARS, S-A-R-S. It stood for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. This family of viruses attacks your respiratory system, your lungs, and so that's why you're hearing the warnings out there that people that come down with this virus, if you have any type of a lung disease, emphysema, those are the most vulnerable people. Now, when your lungs are being attacked by a virus and you're elderly, then it puts a lot of stress, well, it does on everybody, it puts a lot of stress on the rest of your body organs and your system in general to overcome that. And this is why elderly people are most prone to having the worst effects. Some people are going to get this virus. It's going to be like having a bad cold, and they get over it because they have a robust immune system to begin with. This instantly starts fighting. Now, when I mentioned that it was a 10 to 14 day period, I asked why is that? I looked into this, and apparently when this type of virus gets into your body, it has an ability to, one, mask itself that your body doesn't even know it's there. We have several layers of the immune system, and the first stages of the immune system are not even aware that this virus is there, so they are not prompted to attack and fight the virus. So it's kind of like a Trojan horse. It gets into the city streets of the ancient town of Troy and starts going about setting itself up, and then all of a sudden it overwhelms the body, and it's an overwhelming attack on you. Okay, let's go on here. The epidemic was contained in China, the SARS epidemic. According to the World Health Organization, only about 8,000 cases were reported, with a mortality rate between 9.5 and 10%. So in other words, of the 8,000 people that contacted SARS, about 800 of them died. 10 years later, another strain of coronavirus emerged in Saudi Arabia with an extremely high mortality rate of 35%. Fortunately, that epidemic was also contained. Unfortunately, 2,400 people were affected, of which about 800 people died. This virus was called MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. We wouldn't hear about a similar virus until December of 2019. The first reports of a respiratory syndrome emerged once again in China, specifically in Wuhan province. The virus has been referred to as SARS-CoV-2, and the disease was COVID-19, coronavirus 2019. That's where the 19 comes from. There are rumors that this virus has mutated, though no mutation has been recognized by medical officials. Okay, how far has the virus spread? This is as of a few days ago. Since then, the virus has spread to more than 115 nations, and March 11th, there were more than 126,300 cases reported in the infected country. Of these, some 68,285 patients have fully recovered. There are about 53,382 cases considered active, and more than 4,633 people have died. Of the active cases, 89% seem to have minor conditions, and the rest are in the severe or critical condition. So in other words, if let's say we had 100 cases of this virus in Peru, we would have about 10 severe cases of the virus. The others would be not so severe that people would recover, provided they don't die of fright because of being afraid. See, I think ignorance is the problem here. It's people fear the unknown. So it's important to understand what your enemy is. It's not the guy in the parking lot at Costco taking the toilet paper. It's a recognized family of viruses. It's been dealt with in the past. Humanity went on. Sure, you should be concerned about yourself and your family, but you shouldn't be panicked to the point that you're fighting each other, because fighting each other is not going to prevent you from getting the virus. In fact, close physical contact is going to be worse on you than the punch you got in the nose from the person you're with. You want to maintain about 3 feet, about 1 meter, which is a little bit less than a yard, away from people when you're out in crowds. The reason is this, is that if you run into somebody that has the virus and you're close to them, closer than a meter, then if they happen to sneeze or cough, then the droplets from them could get on you and cause you to transfer the virus from where it goes on you up to where it can get inside you. Now, according to my doctor the other day, he said the most vulnerable part of you is your eyes. Evidently, the way the mucous membranes are and so forth, that is the best way for the virus to get into your body. Which brings me up to the other point, everybody walking around with masks. Now, the other two obvious locations where a virus could enter your body would be through your nose and your mouth. So you've covered up your nose and your mouth, but you still have your eyes. You're not going to prevent that virus from getting at you unless you have some type of a military grade mask that completely covers everything. And you see this in these hazmat suits where the people have respirators on and they've got all the the equipment preventing anything from getting close to their skin and to their mouth and to their eyes and to their nose. The advantage, though, of having a mask is that it stops you from rubbing your nose or your mouth. I sit and try to stop myself from rubbing my nose and my mouth, consciously made the effort, and I still catch myself rubbing my nose, rubbing my mouth. It's like you get an itch and you feel like scratching it. It's just, it's almost like we have to tape our hands to our sides to keep this from happening. So this is where the mask would come in. As far as the eyes go, I've not heard anybody recommend how to stop you from rubbing your eyes while you got a mask on. So maybe the common sense thing to do would be wear sunglasses or clear lens glasses, and that would stop you from rubbing anything that's on you into your eyes. Now, the other most common sense, and again, I'm sure a lot of people aren't thinking about this. There was a video I watched where rather than shake somebody's hands, people were bumping each other. Well, did you know that virus could live up to 36 hours on your clothing? And by you bumping up against that person, you have just transferred the virus from them to your clothing. And you see, you need to maintain this distance away from the other people. If you do this and takes just some basic, common sense steps like not going out into crowded areas. One of the things that this doctor talked about that I watched from Johns Hopkins, and by the way, he's out there. You can see his videos out there on YouTube, and he was on, I believe I watched him on CNN News, but he's around trying to put the real truth out there about this. He said he cringes when he heard his neighbor say that in a couple of weeks they're going to be going to another town and for their child's swim meet. You don't want to be going to your child's swim meet while this is going on right now. It's common sense for you to be taking time to be with your family, work around the house, get to know each other, dig out the old DVDs that you have, and stay pretty close to home. You look at it this way. Until we really get a handle on what's going on, approach it as if you're on vacation. The difference being that you're not going to be traveling to Aunt Sally's house and going to the beach. You're going to be spending time with your family. It's a good time. See, this is another lemonade that we could be making out of lemons. Get to know your wife again. Get to know your husband again. Introduce yourself to your children, the ones that you've been ignoring all these months that they've been in school. And I know that that's harsh to bring that out, but it's the truth. We live in a very busy society right now, and family members pass each other, one going in the door and one going out the door. It's a good time to get to know each other again, to participate in family games, break out the board games, the Monopoly set, a deck of cards, dust them off if you haven't played Rummy or, Hearts or something in a long time. We should be approaching this virus as an adventure, not some curse that's on us, because again, it will pass. I want to go on here. Right now, they're estimating the mortality rate may end up here in the United States being 1% or less. According to a published article in the New England Journal of Medicine, by way of comparison, the common flu in the United States has a mortality rate of approximately 0.1%. So what does that tell you? That tells you that this particular virus is 10 times more lethal than the flu. Because we're hearing out there misinformation that, well, it's like getting the flu. No, it's not like getting the flu. It's 10 times worse than getting the flu. So common sense tells us that we should be 10 times, maybe 100 times, more wary of being around people during virus season. We're right in the middle of flu season right now. Now, just add this on, so what we are in is the flu and coronavirus season. So you already should be taking precautions about staying away from people that might have the flu, or if you have the symptoms, staying away from people that are elderly. Don't go down to the nursing home and visit Aunt Gertrude or Uncle Fred. They are the most vulnerable people in your family. Stay away. Call them on the phone. Send them a card. Get used to writing letters again. When was the last time you sat down and actually wrote somebody a letter? Okay. What are the symptoms of coronavirus? As mentioned above, 20% of patients will never develop any symptoms. The observed symptoms are fever, cough, muscle aches, headache, vomiting, and diarrhea. These are symptoms are similar to those of flu, particularly similar to influenza. Symptoms remain mild in 85% to 89% of cases, but 11% again to 15% of cases progress to severe and critical symptoms. These patients will have respiratory distress, the development of pneumonia, and even the presentation of hypertension or septic shock. Why is the situation alarming for many? Globally, the alarm is due mostly to the number of infected patients, not so much by the mortality rate. The increased number of patients makes the number of deaths due to this virus potentially very high. Potentially millions of people would be affected by the virus by the time the epidemic ends. This could produce hundreds of thousands of deaths unless we develop a vaccine or some kind of treatment soon. Most vaccine experts say we will not have a vaccine before the next 12 to 18 months. So don't believe anybody that's telling you, well, there's going to be a vaccine available in 30 days or 45 days. No, these vaccines have to be developed. They have to go through human trials. There's a lot that goes into coming up with a vaccine. Multiple antivirals are being tested, but there is currently no official recommendation for any of them. What other prevention measures should we take? We recommend frequent hand washing. For medical personnel who handle cases of coronavirus, the use of gloves, gowns, and even glasses may be necessary depending on the procedure to be performed on the patient. It is also recommended that until this epidemic is considered to be under control, we minimize physical contact with other people. Examples, no shaking hands, no hugging, no kissing, and so on. Now, for you young lovers out there and people that are in relationships, This is going to be a trying time for you. The natural thing is to want to hold hands, kiss somebody, be affectionate to them. But think of it this way. The amount of risk that you are taking both for yourself and them, is it really worth the effort you're going through? As believers, how do we think about it? You know, as Christians, what should we be thinking about this? Without a doubt, we must be prudent and responsible, both in observing the recommended measures and also maintaining our own health. The world population seems to be in panic, but for Christians, it's important to emphasize that there's no reason to experience such anxiety, especially when we consider that God of the heavens and the earth is the same God who controls every microbe, every item, and every molecule. This is a good time for Christians to demonstrate sanity, peace, and hope, recognizing that our lives do not depend on the entry of a microorganism into our bodies. Instead, it depends on the God who determines the beginning and the end of our history on earth. The Apostle Paul calls us not to be anxious for anything. We can call Christians to peace in the worst circumstances because of God's sovereign control over his condition. Now, one of the issues that I think needs to be brought up here is, how do you talk to your children right now about what's going on? They're hearing your conversation. They know that people are upset. They're with you in the car when you're down at Costco. They're seeing the people fighting over the toilet paper. Now, they may not speak up to you, but they have this going on in their minds, and they're fearful. You know, remember, they are vulnerable. They depend upon their parents and other adults in the family and in the community for safety. So how do you think it makes them feel when they hear you at home, on the telephone, in the car, amongst friends, out in the public, where you're in a panic mode? You need to be exuding confidence right now that, hey, things are going to get better. This is going to be an adventure. You know, what is the worst thing? You know, in a child's mind, they think, oh, my parents are going to die. I'm going to be left alone, or I'm going to die. And so most people suppress or ignore the inevitability of death. The coronavirus has raised this question in an undeniable way for us all. You know, but instead you should be telling your children to have hope, and that even in the event of death, that's not the end. Sure, the soul will leave the body, but it's going to go back to God. It's only the body that's going to remain behind. They themselves, as you, their mom and dad, their grandparents, it's not some type of a extinction event that you'll never exist again. You are going to die, and your children are going to die at some point in time. Do not deny this fact. In fact, this should be a conversation, not one of horror, not one of, grief, but an actual conversation that everybody should be having with their families anyway. Death should not be stuck in a closet where it's not going to happen. We're all going to come down with some illness, some accident. Something is going to cause our demise. A coronavirus is just one of many areas out there that you could end up dying from. Again, you are going to die. Believe it or not, Dwight Lilly tells you right now that you do not have 100% immortality. You not in a physical sense, you don't. You are immortal in the fact that you are going to go on after this life is here on earth is over with. Why would Christians still be responsible? Why should Christians still be responsible, safe, and wise about the coronavirus? Well, we have no fear in death. We also don't act like fools. We don't take unwise risks. We heed the advice of credible authorities. Why? The first grader and I happened to talk. This is from an article. The first grader and I talked about how our lives are a gift from God. Our Lord calls us to be faithful towards this life for His glory. Part of being good stewards involves protecting our bodies and monitoring our health. We want to treat our lives and the lives of others as sacred, since we're all made in the image of God. Given this important stewardship, we should follow the common sense practices that the healthcare authorities have delivered. Again, washing your hands, keeping away from other people, and so forth. Fear is not something that should be even in the slightest world of a Christian. You know, throughout the biblical times when people were, and today, people have been persecuted for their religious beliefs throughout history. Should you fear that? Well, I wouldn't say fear it. You don't want to be persecuted. You don't want to be physically attacked or maimed for your beliefs. But you have to accept that in this world that we live in, something like that could happen. The children may need to be aware of this fact too, that in the family, you know, their faith is being built up through attending church, through praying, through all the different worship practices you, your family, your community, your church goes through, that they are building up Christian muscles. But they should expect that there are going to be people that are going to oppose their faith. You know, Satan controls this world out here, and he does everything he can to destroy their lives, the little children's lives, right along with yours. None of us are immune to his attack. So your children should be constantly aware of this fact, and not in fear, but use the tools that we Christians have been given available. Again, prayer. Lots and lots of prayer. Never go to bed at night, you know, hateful, you know, refusing to forgive some transgression that took place that day. You should pray, ask God for forgiveness of any sins that you've committed, or if you happen to be feeling hateful, but never lay your head down on the pillow, and your children should be told this. Don't go to bed with this heavy heart here. Go to bed free. Having given up, as you go to sleep, give it up into the hands of God to have you wake up in the morning. Now, you're not going to be guaranteed again. See, there's no 100% guarantee here. There's no guarantee that you will or they will wake up in the morning. But if you go to bed clearly cognizant of the fact that you are a child of God and that you always have been and will be in His hand, that this is not your life, it's His life that you're living, and He's living through you. It's a different perspective you have to take on, but if you take on this perspective and implore your children to live this way, to put confidence out there in their heart. Again, these are little kids that we're dealing with. I want to move on here because I've copied quite a few different articles and thought about this before this week's show, because since last Saturday and this Saturday, virtually everything that I've been hearing has been coronavirus. There was a guy by the name of C.S. Lewis, and he, by the way, C.S. Lewis, he was a scholar. He was a professor at Cambridge in England, Oxford College, and he wrote some very interesting books. Mere Christianity was one of them, but a whole bunch of books on Christianity. And believe it or not, the guy was an atheist well into his adult life. If it wasn't for the fact that he used common sense, logic, reasoning, and so forth, that he probably would have died an atheist. But instead, he listened to those around him. He thought about it and analyzed it, and come to the conclusion that he had been wrong his whole life, and that there was in fact a Jesus Christ, and that the Jesus Christ was Savior. And he applied the same process he did in other areas of his educational life. He dug in, thought, thought about it, read about it, practiced it, and in a sense became an expert on the subject. Okay, so how he did, now he's been dead a long time, but during World War II, C.S. Lewis used to give a weekly radio, kind of like what I'm doing right here, stumbling along, to the English people, because he lived over in England. And so he's, in one way, here's one of the pieces that he wrote. He says, in one way, we think a great deal too much about the atomic bomb. Now remember, back in those days, the atomic bomb was the big fear that we were all going to be annihilated by a nuclear war. Where here we are, the atom bomb was dropped in 1945, so that was 75 years ago. We still have been nuked. And we hear less and less of the fear about this. But in those days, when it was a very new, kind of like what we're looking at like here with the coronavirus, people were afraid because it was an unknown. They knew that it had the potential of killing them and doing a lot of damage, so that was the basis of their fear. So C.S. Lewis goes on, he says, in one way we think a great deal too much of the atomic bomb. How are we to live in an atomic age? He says, I am tempted to reply, why, as you would have lived in the 16th century when the plague visited London almost every year? Or as you would have lived in a Viking age when raiders from Scandinavia might land and cut your throat any night, or indeed as you are already living in an age of cancer, an age of syphilis, an age of paralysis, an age of air raids, an age of railway accident, an age of motor accident. In other words, do not let us begin by exaggerating the novelty of our situation. Believe me, dear sir or madam, you and all whom you love are already sentenced to death before the atomic bomb was invented, and quite a high percentage of us were going to die in unpleasant ways. We had indeed one very great advantage over our ancestors, aesthetics, but we have that still. It is perfectly ridiculous to go about whimpering and drawing long faces because the scientists have added one more chance of painful and premature death to a world which already bristled with such chances, and in which death itself was not a chance at all, but a certainty. This is the first point to be made, and the first action to be taken is to pull ourselves together. If we are all going to be destroyed by an atomic bomb, let the bomb, when it comes, find us doing sensible and human things. Praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, chatting to our friends over a pint and a game of darts, not huddled together like frightened sheep and thinking about bombs. They may break our bodies. A coronavirus can do that, but they need not dominate our mind. So that is one of the messages I really wanted to bring to you guys today on my radio show, is that already as Christians, you've been facing annihilation from one thing or another since the day you were born. But not to dwell on it. You know, how many, again, I want to get back to the example given at the beginning of the radio show. I can't picture why somebody would be in a parking lot fighting with somebody else over a roll of toilet paper. I mean, this is not common sense. Do they really think they're going to run out of toilet paper? As my producer he's holding up a roll of toilet paper right now here in the studio. But, you know, that's a good prop for the show. What do you think life was like in biblical times when people had to relieve themselves? Did they go down to Costco and buy a 24-pack of toilet paper? Of course not, but they still went ahead and took care of business. Rather than worry about toilet paper running out, maybe you should check out, as one guy said that I read the other day, see what kind of plants and trees have soft leaves, because that's what our ancestors used. See, spending all this time this gas, worry. You know, you have more of a physical threat going on right now, just getting on the streets of Pahrump and navigating the traffic through the roundabouts and down the street than you have of something happening to you. You've got more of a threat to your life right now, bumping into those people at Walmart. Why are you taking these risks? It's this, again, a very good lesson that we should all be learning. In fact, we should thank God that we have a virus around to bring us back to where we're having to interact with each other, or the relationships we have, husbands getting to know each other, kids getting to know their wives, their moms, husbands getting to know their wives again, wives getting to know their husbands again, reintroducing yourself to the grandparents that you haven't visited maybe in the last month. This is a silver lining that we have here, because as C.S. Lewis said, you've already got plenty of things that are going to kill you, and a lot of you, it's not going to be a pleasant death. So why dwell on it like you're dwelling on it out there? So what did the early church teach us about coronavirus? Okay, I'm going to read this here. The early church was no stranger to plagues, epidemics, and mass hysteria. In fact, according to both Christian and also non-Christian accounts, one of the main catalysts for the church's explosive growth in its early years was how Christians navigated disease, suffering, and death. The church's posture made such a strong impression on Roman society that even pagan Roman emperors complained to pagan priests about their declining numbers, telling them to step up their game. So what did Christians do differently that shook the Roman Empire? And what can the early church teach us in light of coronavirus? In AD 249 to AD 262, Western civilization was devastated by one of the deadliest pandemics in its history. Though the exact cause of the plague is uncertain, the city of Rome was said to have lost an estimated 5,000 people a day at the height of the outbreak. One eyewitness, Bishop Dionysius of Alexandria, wrote that although the plague did not discriminate between Christians and non-Christians, its full impact fell on non-Christians. Having noted the difference between Christian and non-Christian responses to the plague, he says of the non-Christians in Alexandria, as the first onset of the disease, they pushed the sufferers away and fled from their dearest, throwing them into the roads before they were dead and treating unburied corpses as dirt, hoping thereby to avert the spread and contagion of the fatal disease. But do what they might, they found it difficult to escape. Non-Christian accounts confirm this sentiment. A century later, the Emperor Julian attempted to curb the growth of Christianity after the plague by leading a campaign to establish pagan charities that mirrored the work of Christians in his realm. In an AD 362 letter, Julian complained that the Hellenists needed to match the Christians in virtue, blaming the recent growth of Christianity on their, quote, benevolence to strangers, their care for the graves of the dead, and the pretended holiness of their lives. Elsewhere he wrote, for it is a disgrace that the impious Chaldeans, Christians, that's what they call them, support not only their own poor, but ours as well. Though Julian questioned the motives of Christians, his embarrassment over Hellenic charities confirms pagan efforts fell massively short of Christian standards of serving the sick and poor, especially during the epidemics. According to Rodney Stark in the book The Rise of Christianity, this is because, quote, for all that Julian urged pagan priests to match these Christian practices, there was little or no response because there were no doctrinal basis or traditional practices for them to build upon. You see, the Christians, by their own charity to each other, were the ones that were surviving these plagues far more percentage-wise than the pagans and non-Christians. Okay, if the non-Christian response to the plague was characterized by self-protection, self-preservation, and avoiding the sick at all costs, the Christian response was the opposite, according to Dionysius, and the plague served as a schooling and testing for Christians. I'm going to say that again. A schooling and testing for Christians. We right now are being schooled and tested as Christians by the coronavirus. In a detailed description of how Christians responded to the plague in Alexandria, he writes of how the best among them honorably served the sick until they themselves caught the disease and died. Most of our brother Christians showed unbounded love and loyalty, never sparing themselves and thinking only of one another. Thinking only of one another. Heedless of the danger, they took charge of the sick, attending to their every need and ministering to them in Christ, and with them departed this life serenely happy. For they were infected by others with the disease, drawing on themselves the sickness of their neighbors and cheerfully accepting their pain. Similarly, in Pontius's biography, Cyprian, the bishop of Carthage, he writes of how the bishop reminded the believers to serve not only fellow Christians, but also non-Christians during the plague. There is nothing remarkable in cherishing merely our own people with the due attentions of love, but that one might become perfect who should do something more than heathen men or publicans, with one who, overcoming evil and good and practicing a merciful kindness like that of God, should love his enemies as well. Thus the good was done to all men, not merely to the household of faith. The impact of this service was twofold. One, Christian sacrifice for their fellow believers stunned the unbelieving world as they witnessed communal love like they'd never seen. Following biblically the book of John, chapter 13, verse 35. And two, Christian sacrifice for non-Christians resulted in the early church experiencing exponential growth as non-Christian survivors who benefit from the care of their Christian neighbors converted to the faith en masse. Now, those of you that don't have a Bible in front of you, in John 13:35, we're told to love one another as Christ would love us. You know, the Bible is mainly about love when you think about it. As we continue to wrestle with how to respond to the coronavirus, notice how non-Christians in the Roman Empire emphasized self-preservation, while the early church emphasized fearless sacrificial service. Whereas non-Christians fled from epidemics and abandoned their sick loved one as they feared the unknown. Christians marched into the epidemics and served both Christians and also non-Christians, seeing their own suffering as an opportunity to spread the gospel and model Christ-like love. How might we put that posture into practice in the face of coronavirus? Setting ourselves apart from the world in how we respond to the growing epidemic. Perhaps we begin by resisting the fear that is leading to panic in various sectors of our society. Instead of modeling peace and calm in the midst of rising anxiety all around us, perhaps we choose to patronize local Asian American restaurants and businesses that other Americans are avoiding due to fear being stereotyping. We might also seek to sacrificially serve our neighbors by prudently abiding by the advice of medical professionals to help slow the spread of the disease. Instead of just our own health, we should prioritize the health of the wider community, especially the most vulnerable citizens, by exercising an abundance of caution without perpetrating fear, hysteria, and misinformation. This might mean cost for us, canceling travel or planned events, or even self-quarantine if we think we've been exposed. But we should accept these costs with joy. Other people would not think this a time of festival. Dionysus said of the epidemic of his day, but far from being a time of distress, it is a time of unimaginable joy. To be clear, Dionysus was not celebrating the death and suffering that accompany epidemics. Rather, he was rejoicing in the opportunity such circumstances present for testing our faith, to go out of our way to love and serve our neighbors, spreading gospel hope to both word and deed, in both word and deed, in times of great fear. The author of that put into words what I've been trying to emphasize this entire show. As a Christian, we have to behave as Christians, as a community of basically people that are in love with each other, in love with life, in love with Jesus, in love with our God. You don't treat people you're in love with despite. You don't fear them. You don't reject them. If a person is Asian, you don't go beat them up because, well, you heard that the virus came from China. That person didn't have anything to do with inflicting this virus on our community. What we need to do, again, is go down and embrace these people that are different than us. Visit their restaurants, visit their businesses, support them. Act as a community. Act as good neighbors. Act in fellowship. Don't shun people. This right now, again, is a time of fear amongst a lot of people. A lot of people that have not embraced Jesus Christ as their Savior have not read the Bible. It's not just reading the Bible. You know, I heard a guy posted the other day on social media that he's an expert on all things biblical because he read the Bible 3 times, and therefore he knows that none of it's true, and he's an avowed atheist. I thought to myself about that, well, we're not taught and instructed to read the Bible. We're taught to study the Word. There's a whole difference in approaching the Bible as if it's some historical story, like reading the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Within the Bible, the words, it's the Word. This is God speaking to us. Study the Word. You know, sit down with a tablet when you open the Bible up and a pen and read a verse and then study it. Think about it. Pray about it. What was God telling you in that verse? As you go, it's a study material. You know, so you should be studying and then putting into practice what God is telling you to do. That's a critical ingredient here. You have to put into practice your faith right now with this coronavirus out there. Again, this is a time of making lemonade. You know, it's, you know, my wife and I, you know, we're down, you know, we pray every day, not just for ourselves, we pray for all of you out there. I'm praying for everybody out there in my community, my state. You know, regardless, you could hate my guts. That's not me. That's you hating me. That's not me hating you. I'm still going to love you. Those that persecute me, I love you. You know, you're my brothers, you're my sisters out there, and all of you out there, I'm hoping, will take this message today to heart and start practicing good Christian principles, even if you're not Christian. There's nothing that I talked about today should insult you or make you impervious to the message. The message of Christ was for everybody in all time, not just people that show up and sit in the front row of the you know, the pews at church. It's for those that are studying and even those that are ignorant, you know, of their faith, even though they sit in church every day. Love them, embrace them, help them. If your neighbor gets sick, take care of them. take care of your neighbor. Don't fear death because, as I said, you are going to die from something anyway. Already before this coronavirus came along, there were so many areas that are going to take, one of them is going to take you out. There's going to be something out there that is going to take you out. So don't fear it. You know, go about your daily lives, you know, enjoying each other, enjoying life for what it has to offer, learning as you go along, and experiencing each other in brotherly love, in sisterly love. And in the end, I hope to all see you on the other side, because that's where eventually we're going to end up anyway. And I'm hoping on the one side rather than the other side, and you should be too. So with that, I'm going to have to close out this message today. You guys have a great week. You can visit me on Facebook. You know, if you want to find out where I'm at, it's just Dwight Lilly. How complicated is that? And I'll pop up there, and we'll see you down the road. Goodbye now. God bless you all.